So welcome again. We'll send the recording tomorrow with the outline of class. And perhaps maybe if there's any other fun things you'd like to share, or maybe include tomorrow. But so everybody will have that. Please ask questions as we go throughout. And we'll just go ahead and get started. If it's not chat, just taking yourself off me to ask questions. I was almost going to ask anybody, and it's kind of fun when we have these regional focuses, if anybody has been to Sardinia or has been to Sicily, or even some of these islands like Elba. Is supposed to be gorgeous, this tiny little island off the coast of Tuscany. Ischia near Naples. I haven't either. I've been to Tuscany, I've been to Naples. Corkbus did a little trip to Sicily a few years ago, and I know like they visited Benanti, but I always kind of want to ask, Laura, who else did you go visit and stuff as well? But no, I have yet to go myself. But if you have, you can always jump in and share, because I think it's those personal experiences that help. We can all learn from. All right, let's go ahead and get this up. In the background there, native wine grapes of Italy. Ian Dagadas, if you want to get into the nitty gritty, more of a resource book than anything else. But if you always want to hear someone that's incredibly knowledgeable but incredibly friendly and approachable in his education, Ian Dagada, native wine grapes of Italy, is kind of a cool one. I didn't even mean to bring that up, but it was there. I'll put up a couple books real quick, just because as I did that, everybody, and you can all see my screen and stuff. Okay, I think we're in good. You can hear me. It's kind of cool because there's always been this book, the Vino Italiano, by Joseph Bastianich, but it was and it's kind of cool because it talks a lot about the food and the people and the culture of the areas, let alone like major wine styles and grapes and everything that's used. But it's already like it was published or copyrighted in 2002. So we haven't really seen many books outside of this. And I think maybe a newer edition released in 2005 for like 20 years, but still not a bad resource. It's kind of funny to see how things have even changed during the last 20 or so years, and how these regions are really have developed in that short period of time, where they don't even really talk about Etna all so much within this book. They talk about neighboring regions in Sicily like Faro, but again, just a difference of 20 years. And then I guess why I mentioned that, because there is a recent publication called Vino by Joseph Capanali, and then this is just a recent release. He does a lot of wonderful Italian restaurants in the city, and that's kind of a focus for Joseph Capanali. But this is kind of a cool, more up-to-date book or reference that I was going through, even in preparation for tonight's class. And it's cool because they'll mention like some producers that you should check out and other references, but that would be worth a purchase if you're interested. So we have a lot of pretty pictures here in front of us. I think that's kind of the point of today. Trips to the beach and these beautiful sceneries. But we're off to the Italian islands, where we're going to visit Sardinia, Sicily, islands kind of off related to Sicily, Pantelleria, closer to northern parts of Africa than the rest of Italy, totally on its own thing. Salina, this is an island then on just the northern side of Sicily. We'll have some maps here in front of us. Elba, that's right off the coast of Tuscany. That's supposed to be a wonderful place to visit. And then Ischia, towards one of our last slides, right off the coast of Naples and Campania. This is coming from. Yeah, some of these, my friend Amber had put together some slides. Sorry, like I didn't even ask her to see where this picture came from, if it would be Sardinia or wherever, but these crazy cliffs that shape the coastline. And then here, where maps are so helpful, right off the toe of Italy's boot from Calabria, we cross the Strait of Messina, and we're here in the southern most island, Sicily, in one of the largest region of production. And then you can see much further away from Sicily is Sardinia. I heard it's like 130 kilometers, you're given kilometers when reading about these areas from coast of Italy. And gosh, I was like reading some reference there saying even for some of the fastest ferries, it's still like an 8-hour trip from any place of departure. I didn't follow up on that and double check everything, but when we're looking just physically where it's located, I could see that possibly being true. We recently did a Corsica and Provence class, both areas of France, but you can see Corsica, I believe this is only a distance of like 11 kilometers or so. You could almost like swim this distance. Sardinia, Italy, to parts of Corsica. But where we're kind of headed, and then this is the Lipari, this island off the northern coast of Sicily, and then again our Ischia of Naples, and then Elba off the coast of Tuscany. We're gonna go 1, 2, 3, and 4. That's how we're gonna approach this. And you can see 20 autonomous regions of Italy, only recognized as a unified nation in 1861. But Italy was such a strong background. We just kind of more of a generalization of like a unified nation prior to that. How this is going to work, I'm just going to touch briefly on wine laws. So when we're visiting these regions, perhaps put things into context and maybe a little bit with label reading and I guess understanding how things are organized. But modeled after the French AOC system, like here, I'm going to zoom this down a little bit. And always kind of working like a pyramid, and maybe I'll start this in a little reverse, but we could just have a vino da tavola. Italy started their appellation system, their wine law system in 1963. Is again just meant to be a guarantee or designation of quality that also represented geographic boundaries, varietals from major styles that have historically been made within these particular areas. And then it could be everything related to yields and alcohol levels and even aging requirements. That's one major departure, Italy versus France. France usually doesn't require aging regulations, but we could essentially be having a wine called Vino de Tavola as if it's coming from anywhere in Italy, possibly putting a grape on the label or possibly putting a vintage, but essentially the grape could be coming anywhere from Italy. This would be your least expensive offering, the most general designation you can imagine. And as we slowly move from this broad table wine, thanks to the folks in Tuscany, our super Tuscans that perhaps when this DOC system was put into place in 1963, these top tier designations, me just now jumping up to the top real quick, are Denominazione di Origine Controllatas, or designated controlled origins. Like of Tuscany, where you'd have Chianti Classico, well, they would historically use Sangiovese there, and then they decided that it would best to blend it with some native white varietals. That was a common practice at the time. Well, what if you wanted to release a wine from Chianti, but you happen to be planting Cabernet because you like the wines of Bordeaux or you like what they're doing in California? Well, that doesn't fit the regulations of our DOC designation. So you'd have to release it as something lower. That lower domination would then just be your table wine, which is considered the most inferior product, I guess. But it was these exceptional winemakers that were producing some of the best wines from these Cabernets and these Merlots, where they created their name, almost a promotional name for themselves called Super Tuscans. And it was because of the success of the Super Tuscans that they came up with the stepping stone categories. That's my point in explanation. So we go from table wine into the stepping stone category of IGT, they'll just say it as, or IGP, Indicazione Geografica Tipica. So now in Tuscany, you might see a wine just labeled simply Tuscany. So at least you know it's coming from this area, and that it might be Sangiovese, but you might be able to make Cabernet from it or a Merlot and other permitted varieties. A little bit looser regulations than what you'd find in this top tier DOC, or one step above it, where we have over 70 now, our DOCG, our guarantee of a level of quality. And we only have one of these, our top tier, in both Sicily and Sardinia. So we'll soon find out what they are. If you know what they are, because I think a few of you do, you could write in perhaps our DOCG of Sardinia in chat. or if you happen to know the one top tier DOCG of Sicily, you can share that within chat too. Of course, Venkat comes to a lot of our classes, so don't be. And he did it. These are the two, if you're wondering them, Ceresole de Vittoria of Sicily and Vermentino de Gallura of Sardinia. And I included these labels here. Like sometimes you might see these DOC and DOCGs on that like neck of the bottle on the very top, especially in like Chianti Classico. But maybe if you're just looking at other labels, you can see that this is one of these famous producers of Etna, definitely in this wave of progression where he went totally non-interventionalist with like no sulfites and are playing around with amphora pots and all sorts of things. But he has the Susukaro, kind of famous for these certain styles of rosés, but he doesn't label it as Etna. He actually labels it as just Siciliane Rosato, a broader IGP regulation. The reason for that, it could maybe be in protest of this denomination system. It could also be sometimes that he's playing around with fruit or blends that doesn't fit, again, within this high tier quality. So if we just looked at this, not to extend on it so much, we wouldn't know anything else other than this was a wine from Sicily. We just happen to know that Frank Cornelissen is based in Etna, and he works with a lot of these native varietals. So I know that this Rosato is made from Mascalese, but it really doesn't tell you anything different. And here, I guess it's on our slide, but it's in very small print. This is our one top tier Ceresole de Vittoria, a Classico coming from Sicily, recognized. And what year was it? Vermentino de Gallura was 96. Ceresole de Vittoria. Oh, that one's escaping me. I'm sure I have it in the slides. I wanted to remember the year that was actually recognized as that top tier. But we can see it, and it actually says denominazione origine controllata e garantita. So you will see that on the label, and then it'll protect everything from the varietals that could be used. So you know that this is Nero d'Avola blended with Frappato, and it's coming from the southeastern area of Vittoria, versus this could be on top anything, not knowing the producer, anything from Nero d'Avola to Frappato to Cabernet or whatever. It doesn't really tell you anything more specific, kind of. But that's a loose designation. So now we're just going to get into the background and history, specifically with these major islands of Sardinia. We'll highlight a little bit of some of the things that differentiated with history and background once we get over to Sicily, but then just kind of go into a lot of these major areas, all kind of color coded on the map. Like this is the Vermentino de Gallura, our one top tier DOCG in northern parts of Sardinia, and all of these as well. These are all demarcated areas recognized by Italian wine law. So maybe highlighting the more influential ones, and then the styles that we could expect with perhaps some producers along the way. But the history goes back. I mean, the Phoenicians were the ones to kind of spread viticulture throughout the Mediterranean along with the Greeks, but Phoenicians having a little bit stronger influence here. And even in that influence of even drinking and enjoying wines, it seems like, just along with teaching perhaps others native to the area. The Nuragis was a major part of them. This group that had kind of populated the area prior to the Phoenicians. Nuragis, if you're wondering what I'm saying, it's like Nuragis. We'll revisit a region towards the bottom that also kind of will show that spelling of this native, this group. But it's kind of wild because even if this history that even predates Phoenicians, you'll find this old, like, I don't want to say stone architecture, but like these old stone ruins going back thousands of years that still like kind of can be found all throughout the island, reminding us of this almost like prehistoric, not prehistoric history, but this ancient history almost that goes behind it, again, prior to the point of the Phoenicians. But they brought viticulture roughly around like 6th century BC, about 2,600 years ago. But although they're the ones to start viticulture, we're just going to move along to get to other major points in our history belt. some of the main grapes used in Sardinia. Things unique. Does anybody know one major red grape of Sardinia? You could probably already guess Vermentino is one of the whites. And then it's Cannonau. That's right. And what is Cannonau also known as? Chat time. Oh, maybe you're afraid to answer now because I know you know it. Grenache. Grenache. That's absolutely right. So we don't see Grenache in too many other areas of Italy. Somewhat so. You might hear it as Alicante sometimes, but really kind of particular to the area of Sardinia. So where does this Cannonau come from? Well, Grenache originally from Spain, where we're in this point of history, 14th to 18th century, where under rule under this kingdom of Aragon, essentially a group that oversaw the regions of northeastern Spain, like Barcelona, Catalonia, and then there's even an area of Aragon. But that's where Garnacha comes from. And another major red grape of Spain is Carignan, which is also, besides Cannonau / Grenache, we have Carignano, which is Carignan, also from Spain. So these Spanish varietals, where we don't see them anywhere else in Italy, when did they first make their way to Sardinia? It was under this rule from the 1300s to 1700s from the Spanish Kingdom of Aragon that gave us these really unique grapes specific to Sardinia. Spanish Catalan still spoken in Elguero. This is the northwestern town right out here along the coast. Again, a reference to its continued influence, a northwestern port city. And then this is kind of cool for sherry lovers. Again, there's so little of this even made, but it's again, I guess a unique wine style similar to sherry, which you'd find in southern parts of Spain in Jerez. It's one of the famous fortified wines where they blend multiple vintages in this, they call it a solera system. You usually see it as like almost like a pyramid of collected barrels where they only remove partial amounts and then replace it from previous vintage. So a solera system essentially is a collection of multiple vintages and also aged because of this unique growing environment. The wines rest underneath this little blanket of yeast that they call flor that also adds to its like nutty, like even like salty like flavors. So you don't really see these sherry like styles of wine in too many other areas of the world, but because of this period of influence and also related growing conditions, you can find similar sherry like wines still being produced in these areas on the western coast, Malvasia de Bossa and Vernaccia de Oristano. There's only like one producer that I could find available that releases this Vernaccia de Oristano, and I just put it in chat. The producer is Contini. So it's kind of wild, right? Like you learn about these things, but then you see how much is produced, and it might be still very limited. And I think that actually contributed to its current place right now as well. Most of these growers, they only have like a couple hectares in their possession, and in both of these areas, where you see part of the tale of their story was mass production, bulk winemaking throughout even the 20th century, because it's pretty easy to grow grapes in this hot Mediterranean climate. That's what we see in both of these regions. But where so much was being produced, but a lot of these landholders, especially in Sardinia, what they were doing is just supplying or selling their fruit to larger producers / co-ops. So co-ops were a big thing here. And it's relatively small. This is a relatively low populated island as well, where there's not, a lot of people making wines, especially not with larger holdings. But unlike Sicily, Sardinian culture centered in the mainland and not the coastal areas due to fear of malaria and pirates raiding the coastline. So everybody is hiding out in the center of the island for these reasons. Oddly enough, modern visitors are now warned of crime in the arid Wild West, like inland. They talk a little bit about this book in this book too, written about 20 years ago. I don't know how that is today, if that's warmed up a little bit, but usually people are visiting coastal areas like this Costa Esmeralda or Green Coast up north, where it's supposed to be really pretty, or along perhaps these northwestern parts, Elguero. You can visit this producer called Sella and Musca. But they say to even be a little precautious still as you enter towards the inland parts of Sardinia. Don't get kidnapped by pirates when visiting. I'm just joking, unless you like that idea of the wild, wild west. It's just remote. And there's a lot of sheep. They say there's more sheep on the island than people. Just me trying to chime in with some other things as I think about them. Agriculture was centered on cereal grains since Roman times, but after World War II, the Italian government subsidized many large-scale wine operations focused on vino da taglio, or cutting wine. Okay, another major thing besides just cereal grains in Sicily or in Sardinia, as part of mass production, viticulture was a thing, but you hear about published authors writing about them, and you don't see it ever as anything that's prospering at a high level. One other thing I learned from this Wine Scholar Guild presentation on Sardinia too is how much forestry was a big part of production, and I guess their economy, meant for the building of ships throughout the Middle Ages, or the later parts of the Middle Ages, within the last perhaps few centuries or so. So it's forestry that was a big thing, that also, along with grains during the times of Rome, that was a big part of Sardinia's background. And then as these areas are eventually growing, and you see a large amount of vineyards being planted in the 20th century, co-ops being formed in an area with this Mediterranean heat, supplying fruit not only into areas of Italy, but even in parts of France. And again, this is agriculture, so in weaker vintages further north, you have no problem getting fruit to add color and body from this warmer area of Sardinia. It's kind of like fruit fillers almost, if that makes a little sense. And Sicily, where they saw a lot of that too, this huge bulk production, this kind of like lake of wine supply, it's sometimes referred as. They did a lot with grape concentrates and raisins in Sicily, and also just growing grapes for the point of distilled wine. So why, another reason where, oh my gosh, so much is being produced, well, why don't we see any of it? Well, it was not really quality oriented until just like the last 20 or 30 years. And once this need for extra fruit to bolster wines for other regions was reduced, there was this oversupply, and that's where this government subsidies to come into place, where they call it arcarage almost, and you see this in Corsica as well. But it's them providing these growers a source where they could rip up all these vines that was just producing growing inferior grapes, so where they could limit the amount of production, but in that effort towards quality, where you're seeing this shift, where you have these quality oriented winemakers starting to come into place. And that's what we see as imports, and these wines that are beginning to show up on wine lists and retail shops. So that's, hopefully that made a little bit of sense. This radical shift towards quality. Look at this too. First bottled wines didn't come out of the region until the 1980s. Isn't that crazy? So everything was else just being sold up in like bulk, if it was barrels or other large formats for other reasons. So no one was even bottling anything until the 1980s. And I like to just bring this up too when we talk about the Greeks spreading viticulture throughout the Mediterranean, taking things from the east and moving west. You can kind of see their influence in the areas. I always hear about Greeks being more about extending on the cultures of their wines, and Phoenicians more on their trade. But, those are generalizations that help kind of put things in perspective. And then you can see Sardinia and then Sicily, maybe the Greeks having more of a stronger hold over here, and even bringing the famous Moscato grape over from Greece, where they think it comes from. And you see a lot of sweet fortified examples. But one of these ancient varietals that has been apparent to many where does it all come from? And it's in Greece. But I like to see that map. And looking at the geology, the climate, and the terroir of Sardinia again, because this is viticulture, this is pretty crazy too, right? Look how mountainous this is. It's like 40% considered mountains. I think it overlaps where the rest is like all hilly, like another. So very little of it is actually low-lying flatlands that would just be easy for viticulture. You're kind of having to go into like the nooks and the crannies where you find these positions for vineyards that would allow for higher level quality production. And when you are, it's like the second hottest, driest island in Italy, just falling right behind Sicily in that regard. But it is things like elevation or perhaps proximity to the coast that is always your tempering influence, where you can achieve grapes that have ripeness along with preserved freshness, meaning acidity in wines. And then it's usually high elevation sites where you have that increased diurnal range, the difference of warm daytime temperatures with cool nighttime temperatures, which also helps preserve that brightness in the wines, which you want for longevity. Otherwise, it just be like heat, sun all day long, and you're just getting really ripe grapes really fast, and it turns into a sugar factory, and it's just kind of flabby and rich in its round. It doesn't have any character or any sort of balance. So how they're able to achieve that, like look at here at Galura, where our Vermentino comes from, pretty mountainous. And usually the vineyards are north facing as opposed to south facing. So they don't got that, I guess, some areas even further north. You hear about where it's cooler. The south facing vineyards allow for the exposure to sun to ripen successfully, but you don't want that intense direct heat all day. You want it to be slightly protected, where it'd be north facing, which allows for that slow, steady growing season. More intense heat and light than anywhere else in the mainland. Elevation and marine winds. Two major winds that we consider today, and this influences both Sicily and Sardinia, are the Sirocco winds coming off the north coast of Africa. Fierce, intense, dry winds, and definitely more affected by that down here in the southern parts. The other one, if you like, it's coming from the north. You might hear about the Tramontane winds, which is almost like an extension of the Mistral winds, but oftentimes it is just the Mistral winds that you see from this big plateau coming from the center of France, affecting southern Rhone, Provence, and then making its way all the way here to areas of Sardinia and even in Sicily, that again help moderate what would otherwise maybe be too hot of a growing region and just floating around in the center of the Mediterranean. Rocky granite soils and arid in the northeast near Galura. Yeah, this like ancient area with this like soils that date back, is, if my numbers are correct, it's like 500 million years. But because of this long history and its geological development, I suppose, you do have a patchwork of soils more throughout Sardinia than perhaps I even would maybe consider Sicily, or you read about it that way. But up here in the north, you'd have a little bit more granite up above, which might separate it itself. And it's a poor soil, and that's important for Vermentino, the grape, the white grape. Hey, you guys too. And before, well, I'll have my grapes up here in a second, but this is good because Vermentino, it needs that struggle. Otherwise, it would just, again, it's highly productive, and it needs some way to moderate or slow its growth. And it's these poor soils, these granite soils in Galura, that help achieve that. Scrubland filled interior contains the island's highest elevation, what, 1,834 meters. And that's right around here, I'm pretty sure, is where you get to be at the highest, as well as these rare clay soils similar to those in Champagne. This is where a lot of your best Cannonau, or a lot of your Grenache, is coming from. So a lot of your best Vermentino is up in here in Galura on these poor granitic soils, and a lot of your best Cannonau, although both are grown all throughout the island. If you forget everything else today, just remember Vermentino as your white grape of Sardinia, and Cannonau, which is also known as Grenache, with its Spanish origins, again, both kind of planted throughout the island, but where we see its best expressions, kind of now down here a little bit towards the south. And then as we move continuously further south, it just gets to be a little bit flatter into these areas of Cagliari, and then where again it's most heavily influenced by this North African wind. Microclimates are key. Sardinia, like Sicily. This is me making sure I'm not missing anything, which allows for diversity. And that's where you do get a range in styles. Like even up here, you can do sparkling, if it's frizzante or spumante. You can make pasito styles in different areas, but like while you can find this weird fortified styles of almost like sherry-like examples of wines coming from the western coast, and you can find like ripe, big, juicy Grenache reds, and then these still like crisp, but maybe expressive whites from Vermentino that allow for such a range in styles. But Vermentino, they thought it might have been Spanish for a long time, but thanks to Ian D'Agata, it has been proven that it is from Italy, and you'll find it in other coastal areas of Italy. Tuscany is one of them. Liguria is another one, and you'll find it even in areas of southern France, it would be Provence, where it's known as roll. Piedmont is known as favorita. But everything along the coast. So Vermentino right up here, where else does it come from? Over here and over here, a little up here and over here. And then also in Corsica, it is a dry white, and I think people have tried so many amazing things besides Pinot Grigio from Italy. But if you like your Italian whites, I think you'd probably enjoy Vermentino. I would say that in this warm Mediterranean climate, you do get away from the sharp, tart citrus expression, although there is a acidity there that allows for that. And you do move into this more tropical, lush, very generous fruit. Or it might be things like melon and pineapple and ways that you describe it, because you still get a level of ripeness here that you might not get up here in our cooler, growing up into the hillsides of the Alps, the mountains of the Alps, where you find some Pinot Grigio. So this would be lighter. This would still give you a fuller, riper expression. If you had to compare it, sometimes you're wondering, I think it's too much of a generalization, but they say like Liguria might be a little bit leaner than the ripeness of fruit from Sardinia. I would agree with that. I would say, I actually think I find the ripest expressions of Vermentino from Sardinia than what I do from other coastal areas. I might just leave it at that. But yeah, if you're having lobster or like this like fresh seafood that still has like a added richness or texture, or scallops, Vermentino might be a perfect fit for that, because it does have that almost sweet quality of fruit for being a dry style of wine. It's just this Mediterranean climate. Well, I want something brighter. I want something leaner. It's super, super hot out. Is there any other white grapes going in Sardinia? Yes, there are. And one of them is Nerello. And this is found in the southern parts near Cagliari. I loved it when they compared it to like an Albarino from Spain. Just really minerally, really salty, and again, definitely getting away from that expressive tropical into this leaner, lighter, more citrus fruit. So this would be the main grape coming from the southern parts. And when I briefly tried to touch on this Nerello tribe or group or civilization that had existed for, gosh, I think it was like 1800 BC, moving up all the way to the time of the Phoenicians that had populated this area of southern Sardinia. Maybe a link to Sardinia's background a little bit, but it is still widely productive, because Joseph Campanelli, and I haven't read this anywhere else, because it does take on the meaning of, it shares similar meanings, where Nerello, it actually means abundance, or grab the buckets, or the grape that pays off debts, because you can grow a lot really easily and quickly. So if you ever have trouble meeting ends meets, your Nerello is a highly productive grape, will help you get there, because it'll grow a lot. You can make a lot of wine really quickly. But just remember, lean and light, super sharp. This is a little bit riper and expressive. Vernaccia, this is where we see some of those almost sherry-like examples coming from the western coast. That might be a little nutty and salty, and I don't want to say oxidative, because that wouldn't be necessarily right, but would share similar qualities, I suppose. This is kind of a fun one, Torbato. This can almost taste like kind of like a white burgundy. This is the grape. It was almost extinct. And it was this one producer, Sella and Musca, located up in Alghero, that really was the one to reinvest in it. And then this is a large estate where, again, like if you don't know where to start on your visit, it's kind of recommended. Well, just hang out in Alghero and go visit Sella and Musca, because they have a museum of wine and other things that's supposed to be wonderful to visit. But they're the one to focus on this Torbato grape. My wife works in wine and she worked at Cork Buzz for a little while, and we had a Torbato on the list. And then, sometimes you get introduced to something and it's one that you're familiar with, but it's one that she would sell to all the tables because it's kind of like a textured Chablis. It's a little creamy and it's a little round, but it's still dry and it's still fresh. Torbato, Alghero. And then we have our aromatic varietals, Moscato and Malvasia, that can be made into like almost styles like a Moscato d'Asti, a Piedmont. But then you can also see sweet fortified examples as well. But this is one of the grapes that I thought to be brought over by folks of Greece. And then some of our reds. Did we all forget that Cannonau was Grenache already? I hope not. That's one of the main things to remember, right? But originally from Spain, I think we all get that. Carignano, coming from the southern parts, much darker colors to it. I know quite a few of you attend class, but Grenache, one of the main grapes for Chateauneuf de Pape or your Côte d'Aronde, but usually seen as a blend there with Syrah Mourvedre. Here, it's more of a standalone varietal when you see it. And then you also see it in Priorat. We see a lot of different examples of Garnacha from Priorat, but I would say usually those are a little bit bigger and darker fruited. Here, I like that sun-kissed Pinot Noir description for Grenache, where it's very red fruited, but instead of being light and tart, it's rich and it's round and it's expressive, but it's still very soft in tannins. So it's very approachable that way. It's very friendly. I do come across slightly more rustic examples where you do get into this kind of wild herbs that they also almost see populated in the area. Kind of similar to what they see in Southern Rhone too, but where it's not just like fresh and juicy, there's always something a little savory or a little rustic to it. And that might even be tied to like winemakers and traditions as well, but how it might differentiate. And no, I want something more medium to full bodied, something darker fruited. I still like a little of that savory effort, but I don't want anything too tannic. Well, that's kind of Carignano. It's usually pretty approachable. And the Argiola says one too, where it was just kind of juicy and it was light and refreshing. Some more serious examples by this one Punica, which is a winery. Hey, you guys, if you want a fun one, if you guys like Tuscan wines, put it in the chat. It's Agricolas Punica, but it was a project started in southern Sardinia with that intent to focus on Carignano grapes. But it was a partnership of three, and one of them was this Giacomo Tokis, which was the winemaker for Sassicaia, or no, Tinanello, Salaya, Tinanello, the famous super Tuscan producer. And now you see this person who's created some of the most respected wines from Tuscany, and now what was some of his ventures in Sardinia, because there's not a lot of people moving into this area to focus on winemaking. And here you get some of the best of Italy and some of their efforts. That's Punica, if you want to see the super Tuscan producer and their wine label down in southern Sardinia, where they're focusing on the Carignano variety. Well, you know what? We're not even in August yet. And we've just been hit with so many hot days in a row. There are whole sections of wine lists dedicated to chilled reds. And I love it. Well, are there any chilled reds? Yes. We have Monica. And I've seen a few examples of these as well, but they almost look like deep rosés sometimes. That's even the producer. Lindsay just put up a producer as well. This is kind of got like a floral label, right? Lindsay, this is it's definitely like almost like a deep rosé, incredibly light, incredibly easy drinking. And then again, you want to just put like a little bit of chill to it, this Monica. And then how they got to be, yeah, it's like this almost Hawaiian looking label. If you want to see a producer, you can look in chat maybe look up on your own. Kind of like Sicily, where these 8 areas when they were moving from this transition of like bulk production again from like the 50s and 60s, like post-World War conventional farming, and slowly starting to turn towards quality. A lot of the ways, and you saw that a lot in Sicily, where they were producers like Planeta, where we were starting to release like Cabernet, or they call it international varietals like Merlot, from Sicily, because as the wine world was really starting to develop, we in the United States were just getting turned on and learning about things like Cabernet Merlot, like 70s and 80s, thanks to Mondavi and Robert Parker and all these things. Seeing a Cabernet, something familiar from an area we don't get to try a lot of frums, was kind of like a way for us to be introduced to these styles. So you saw that shift. How did we start to become familiar with these areas? Is a lot due to certain producers working with international grapes, kind of blending them sometimes with these local varietals, if it'd be like Sicily Nerello d'Avola or Nerello Mascalese. And then eventually there were this shift of producers that were like, I'm focusing completely on these indigenous grapes to these regions that tie us to a sense of place that you don't find anywhere else. Planeta still does some good stuff. I'll put this in chat. Even though they're a larger producer, but that's where you could try things like that, like Cabernet Merlot blends with perhaps some indigenous varietals, but they were one of the first to really focus on a level of quality that hadn't previously taken place. But then you have producers like Benanti. These are Sicilian producers that were like, my goal here is Nerello Mascalese, Caricante, these red and white grapes of Etna. Okay, I got to keep moving. What's our one DOCG? You all know. It's Fermentino. It's tropical, but dry. Granite soils, north-facing vineyards. You can try still wines, and you might even be able to. What does the DOCG allow for as far as its regulations and its different styles? You can try a frizzante or spumante, just a lightly sparkling or like traditional method sparkling, and you can try sweet examples. And not of it, a lot of it would be easy to be fine, but it is permitted. And I think it's that preserved acidity from these tempering influences that would allow for such wines like sparkling to be produced. This is La Macchia, Macchia. That's that wild gris, like sage, this mint, this fennel, that not only grown throughout the island, they say will lend itself in the way that the wines can drink every once in a while. And just it's just high elevations, and an area besides its forestry and its background and grain production from the days of Rome. They did a lot with cork production up in the northern parts of Sardinia. If I want an Albarino, but I want to head to Corsica, what do I want? I want Naragas. I want that from the southern parts of Cagliari, our counterpart to Vermentino, but our other major white grape of Sardinia, just found in small parts. And again, just think lean, light, bright tart acid. Any dish you want to kind of finish with a little lemon wedge, like a calamari or like your fresh oysters. You just bring that same kind of tart citrus quality with our Naragas. And then you can see some producers here, Argiolas, Maloney, Trecenta. I haven't tried either of these last two, to be honest. And I maybe have only tried like one or two Naragas that I can even remember. Argiolas was one of the producers. So again, it's an area that has grown rapidly in the last 20, 30 years. And then Cannonau, it's an appellation that does overlap the entire island, but then it has certain subzones within this. But again, I like Côte d'Aron. I like wines of Priorat. Where else can I go explore Grenache and its great expressions? Head to Sardinia. And why is that so unique? Because you don't find Cannonau or Grenache on anywhere else within Italy. Why it can be so fun. And just think, unattended on a vine, Grenache can easily reach 16. I've heard some say 18% alcohol. So it just is a sun-loving varietal that will give you a richness and body while still being like kind of soft and approachable. I think of things like barbecue, or like they have like these roasted pigs. There's the lamb here on the island. where you could see some of these things. Like a pig roast just sounds so good with a glass of Grenache or a glass of Cannonau. Barbagia, I've heard a couple different pronunciations, but that's just an area in the center of the island. Most of, again, our Cannonau grows best right underneath that, south of Nerello, which is a town just in the center. Again, it's this high elevation that we see in the center parts of Sardinia. Again, a little bit about its background, and then just a look at these areas just moving further south, Oliana, Gersu, Capoferrato. That might just be more geographic, just more place specific in the way that the wines could read, where you know your Cannonau could come from. I don't really know anybody labeling that way, to be honest, but I just think where you're further south, more influenced by the Sirocco sun, where you find perhaps a richer, fuller expression. But yeah, they can be light and pretty in color like a Pinot Noir, but then deceptive that way because they can drink so rich and full. This is our other, like again, we have Vermentino, Noragas, or two whites, light and bright, rich and full. We have Cannonau or Garnacha. What's our other main red grape? We have to remember Carignano. And again, you might find simple, fresh, easy expressions. Price would be related to that, or you might be able to find some really cool wines like this from this Punica, from our super Tuscan consultant that established themselves down here. But this is all down here in the southern parts where our Carignano comes from. You can find a Rosato from it. You can find a Nouveau, like a young, fresh, seasonal harvest style. But hey, yeah, it is difficult terrain for people to grow grapes, but kind of a cool little tie with that is it's also difficult for phylloxera to exist in these areas, especially when you get into some of these southern sandy soils. So some of these wines down here, I won't maybe get into phylloxera right now unless you have questions, but they never had to replant. It was a terrible viticultural hazard and concern from this root louse that came over in the late 1800s, but wasn't able to quite reach some of these areas of Sardinia. So why you have these old, they call it albarello vines. It's just like these untrained bush vines. And some of them are on their own rootstock, which never had to be regrafted. So you can play around with some producers that have like 60, 100-year-old vines, and then some of them might even be on their own rootstock, something that doesn't exist in too many places. And this is kind of a look at our Vernaccia di Oristano and how it ages underneath that little blanket of floor for a number of years in these like Caratelli barrels, similar to what you'd see in like Vinsanto production in Tuscany, where they never top it off as it ages for like years on end. The one that Contini does is unfortified. It's just that it gets it up to high enough alcohol levels with Vernaccia that floor is able to exist and develop. But it develops into these like almost like nutty, they say like almost aldehydic, like that's floor-like characteristics, but can be awesome with like roasted almonds or just like your charcuterie or like salty olives, maybe certain cheeses that can just go so well with it because it's like nutty and salty together when you have these wines with the cheese. Again, limited. It'd almost be fun to add one to our wine list just so people could try it. Because there's only one producer I know about. Only 80,000 bottles of this wine are produced annually. That even seems high. There's not that many of this. There's like 800 bottles from this one producer made a year. So most of it drank locally, if anything. Probably hard to find it even if you go. And then La Costa Esmeralda. This is a fair Vizine. That's the Emerald Coast. That's in the northeastern parts, where they're supposed to have some beautiful beaches. And just a little bit about this talk about this worry about going into the center of the island. I guess just be safe, be precautious, I suppose. But it's up in that northwestern parts near Alghero. This is again that Sella and Musca, where you could just go and maybe check out their wine museum, and maybe try Torbato, one of the other unique grapes, white grapes of Sicily. They say keep to the coast. And here's a reference guide, DLC Wine Consortium of Sardinia's guide. And then I think even like check out this E Vino book by Joseph Campanelli. We'll get to it. I'm gonna probably be I think I can still do this with only being 5 minutes over if you're just wondering about time, and still like cover some really strong takeaways, I think. So just to check in back with you. But this is a quick look kind of where they show you the mountains of Sicily. Most of it is on the northern parts where you get more of your volcanic soils. And it's really just an extension of the Apennine Mountains, which kind of form like a spine down the center of central Italy. And then past Calabria's boot, again, past our Strait of Messina that divides us from mainland Greece, and then kind of characterizes this northern parts. But that's where like Mount Etna is located. And then when we move further south, we get into more limestone soils, because this is an area that had been kind of back and forth under and over water throughout its history, but why you see more like limestone soils that characterize these southern parts. But looking in background and history here, again, going back to 5th century BC is really, again, the time of the Greeks. They have a settlement at Acagras or Agrigento, which is actually, if you look at the province, it's over here on this western side, Agrigento. I also remember a lot of things happening over here in the early days of viticulture history near Syracuse. But I should just stick to over here from which the slides states. And then even a key role in development for the rest of Italy. A lot of what was started down here eventually just ran further north into other parts of mainland Sicily. And where you even had Julius Caesar, one of his favorite wines during his time was this Mamertine coming up here in this northeastern parts, thought to be a favorite of his. And then throughout the Middle Ages, Sicily's main export was grain. Similar history to what we saw in Sardinia, right? Because just something easy to grow in a more Mediterranean climate. Wine was made for domestic consumption. I don't think it was anything sought after. It was just something that was produced as a commodity almost. 14th century rise in demand for high quality. This is slowly maybe getting to the time of Renaissance, maybe when there's this shift towards slightly more qualitative wine production. But the major thing, and I think one thing that Sicily is really well known for, is this Englishman, John Woodhouse, who came to this area of Sicily when English was at war at France, and they started looking to other areas of Europe, like Portugal, the port from Portugal, or the sherries from Spain, these fortified wines that they could also even take across the Atlantic Ocean in early days of colonization, and these wines could still drink well as fortified styles where they're adding neutral distilled spirits to these wines to give it a little more power and durability and more, I guess, radical circumstances. But what can you drink besides this fortified port and sherries? Oh my gosh, I found these wines from Marsala in Sicily. You know what? I can fortify these as well, bring them back to England, and just like these other styles that were becoming preferred during the 18th century, just was another alternative for them. And then eventually got to be known as a cooking wine, and we'll learn about a producer who is stepping away from that cooking wine mentality, Marco de Bartoli, and focusing on the best styles of wines that he can make from Marsala. And that same idea with government subsidies, trying to move people away from this bulk supply and lean towards a level of quality that really has only taken place within the last 20, 30 years. Yeah, it might be fun. Might be kind of fun to look up at some wine lists from the early 2000s and even to see if anything from Etna might even be on there. Probably not, right? Again, just geology and climate, terroir. Again, that extension of the Apennine Mountains, hot, dry climate. Irrigation is necessary in most vineyards. This is one of the most Sicily has some of the highest production of wine in all of Italy. They say only sometimes surpassed by the wines of Veneto. But again, a lot of this just distillates or just fillers for other regions, or even into like grape concentrates. A lot of this is actually happening on the western parts where near Marsala is located from a lot of these white varietals. Carato is the main one. We're going to look at that in a second. I guess it was the it's the most planted grape in all of Sicily, and it was like the second most planted grape in Italy like 5-10 years ago, but now it's like number 7. Again, the switch and how people are planting. And then we also have Nero d'Avola as one of the most planted reds, but Colorato, one of the main white grapes of Sicily. Mostly I've previously just gone into other intentions, again, fortified, distilled, or just grape concentrate. So sometimes they break it up into these major areas. West, here on this, more than half of Sicily's vineyards over here on the western side. And what I wanted to say is you don't see Colorato outside of Sicily, and most of it is actually just going over here on the western side. So even though it has this huge place in production, 5-10 years ago being the second most planted grape in all of Italy behind Trebbiano, well, where is it going? And it's kind of odd that you don't see it outside of this pretty much western parts of this island. Then over here on the west, again, mostly devoted to white grapes. Still high at elevation. You know, you're roughly at 600 meters there. If you look at it that way, that's pretty high. Again, the Grand Cru of Burgundy, I always throw that out as a comparison. Some of your most prized vineyards in the world rest at roughly 275 meters. So we're like doubling that. Central parts of Sicily, just south of Palermo, if we're looking where Palermo might be, where you could possibly stay. You get into more sticking with clay, moving into the southern coast, lower lying vineyards, more influenced by the Sirocco winds coming from the south. If you do get back into the center, again, you're just working with higher elevations, and what you get with that is that switch from hot daytime temperatures into cooler nighttime temperatures. But the southeastern part, this is where some of our top winemaking takes place, Cerasuolo de Vittoria. And I like how they break this apart on the map here as well. And the western Sicily, where we have a lot of our white production, Marsala. One of the DOCs where you might see Catarratto as like a dry white would be Alcamo, which would be right over here. But with the southeastern part, even though this is where a lot of quality production takes place, or one DOCG from Cerasuolo de Vittoria, it's only 4% of all of Sicily's total planting. So again, pretty small. And then lower altitude further south, Noto, this is an area for, there's Moscato de Nota, Moscato de Siracusa, again, super small production. It's like 80 hectares to like 30 hectares, and not very much of it is seen much more today, although there's a couple producers going in that area, kind of working on its potential. Ariana Occhipinti is one of them, because there might be an Occhipinti fan in the crowd here tonight. And then just if it's not southeast, lower lying, more influenced by the Sirocco winds. There is quality production here on these limestone soils, but still relatively small in the amount of production. And then just the northeastern parts where we get back into our extension of the Apennine Mountains at higher elevation and slightly more volcanic soils. And then we see a little bit of more rainfall. That's actually a good thing. As a moderating influence, where you have these volcanic soils that are just so well drained where vines have to dig their feet deep in search of not only water and nutrients in the first place. White wines, Caricante. This is the white grape of Etna. You might have just thought of it as red, but this is the white grape. Can almost be like a textured Burgundy as well. You know, a lot of things are compared that way, but ripeness of fruit, because we're in the Mediterranean, Caricante, and then certain producers like Benanti are focusing on like, it's kind of like single vineyard single vineyard releases, such like as Pietra Marina. It's a famous white wine release from Benanti based off Caricante. Try Tenuta della Terranera too, everybody, if you're looking for an example of Caricante. Both of those could be great. Put in Benanti real fast. Colorato, again, was used for bulk production, was used for Marsala production, but you can try some awesome things. I'm going to put in, I don't mean to just put in producers, Porto del Vente. This is another one. They lean towards biodynamics, but do some awesome stuff. I think the name of the game here, if it's Grillo, if it's Colorato, if it's Caricante, if you white whites with a little added texture or body while still being dry, This warm Mediterranean climate in Sicily will allow for that. Anzolia, a couple different expressions here. It usually has a little brighter acidity. I was able to try a little bit of Anzolia from the island of Elba, where it's known as Insonica. That time trying it in Tuscany, it did almost have that Albarino-like citrus, like salty element to it. If I'm, again, drinking differently in Sicily, I would maybe say that this might have a little brighter acidity compared to some of these more textured whites. Interesting too, Coderato times Zabibo, which is just Muscat, right? They just call it Zabibo down here. Coderato, Zabibo, had a baby, and it was Grillo. You'll see there's a producer, Marco de Bartoli, who he was the one that came back to really focus on Marsala production, and he uses only Grillo, I'm pretty sure, for all of his Marsala production, and he makes a still white from it as well that can drink like a Chardonnay. Oh my gosh, I'm keeping you longer. I hope you're all right. I'm gonna try to do this in 5 more minutes. And I'm not trying to rush through it. I just want to be respectful of your time, right? Purpato and Nerello d'Avola, these are the 2 grapes used in Cerasuolo di Vittoria, or 1 DOCG. Nerello d'Avola brings the body, the color, the richness. Purpato, it drinks like a Pinot Noir or like a Gamay. It's lighter in color. It's more about this tart red fruit expression, but it kind of brings the lift to it. So they are used as complementary towards each other in a blend for Cerasuolo di Vittoria. It's DOCG regulations. But if you see them by themselves, because they are released that way, just remember that Purpato will drink a little bit lighter, a little bit prettier. And again, it's almost one of those wines you want to bring to a picnic and put with a little bit of a chill. It's just soft, it's red fruited, and it's absolutely pretty. Check out Ariana Occhipinti as one example. This young lady that's really made a name for herself with Sicilian wines. If you want something so soft and round, but dark fruited and fuller, drink the Nerello d'Avola. Nerello d'Avola is oftentimes compared to Syrah, but it doesn't quite have that spice. So to me, I think of it almost kind of like a fresher, more reserved Malbec. If I had to try to start tying it to something stylistically. Nerello Mascalese. This is the grape of Etna on the eastern parts on the volcanic, active volcano. So this is our Nerello Mascalese. You kind of have your Nerello brothers. Nerello Mascalese, the main grape, it's up to 80, it has to be 80% of the blend, and you blend it with the brother Nerello Cappuccio on these kind of east, northeast, and south-facing hillsides of an active volcano that just erupted was it December 21st, December of 2021, and then like 2018 and 2012. But it's an active volcano where usually the lava has flown to the western sides and stays closer to the top, where it doesn't affect these vineyards that still can reach from 500 to 1,000 meters. So this is just us zooming in on Etna, where our Nerello Mascalese comes from. Jancis Robinson always compared wines of Etna, the Nerello Mascalese grape, to the wines of Burgundy, France, almost like a Pinot Noir. I find it as an in-between between Pinot Noir and Nebbiolo. I just think it has a little more tannins and it has a little more structure than Pinot Noir, but it can still have that elegance to it. I just see it a little bit extra body, but it's kind of wild. You can look up this Etna even erupting videos online and stuff, and it can have this lava explosion that meets up to 1,000 meters. And we won't get into this now, but you can see some of the major like vineyard sites that define this Etna region. If you're interested in those white wines of Etna, like Bianchi, I mentioned Pietra Marina. There's Etna Superiore and Bianco styles, white styles. And for you to label it that way, it has to come from this little site called Milo. So that's where Bianchi's Pietra Marina. So they're focusing in on parts of this mountain that represents perhaps, again, like parcels or hillsides. But look at this. This is really steep. Look at these crazy terrace slopes on where they're growing these grapes. And again, these are like these untrained vines that get to be relatively old, or parts of this Mount Etna have still never been affected by phylloxera. So you can get to have rather old vines, but this is difficult grape growing. That's why not a lot of people do it. And this is, I won't get into all this, but the style is white, richer white. You can make Rosso or even reserve styles that require 4 years of aging, 12 months in bottle. You can find delicious Rosatos from the Nerello Mascalese grape, all from Etna. And then you can even make sparkling wines and whites or rosé examples. But look at these terrace slopes, you guys. That's where this is all coming from. Isn't that kind of wild? Super steep. And that's that well-drained steep slopes that allow for Nerello Mascalese. And it's just an aerial view of what it might look like, these terrace slopes. I'm just kind of taking it in a different perspective. But isn't that, I mean, it's eye-catching, right? And then Feudo Vittoria, 50, 70, 30, 50. Always a majority of Nero de Avila. Hey, you guys, are you tired of me talking? Maybe. What's fuller, Nero de Avila or Frappato? What's fuller and darker fruited? Nero de Avila. That's right. I just have to make sure we walk away with our strong takeaways, right? Still always fresh and inviting. And I think we actually covered a lot of this. 1973, that's what I was trying to remember. Well, that's when it became DOC, wasn't awarded DOCG until 2005. You have to run. I totally understand. We'll send out these slides, and sorry for going over, Lindsay. I apologize. But thanks as always, and nice to see you. Again, we'll have this information provided to everybody. And besides our reds and wonderful whites of Etna, our active volcano, and the eastern parts at high elevation, and our blends of Nero de Avila and Frappato from Solo Vittoria, it does have a long history of sweet wine production, which we see here. So besides Marsala, discovered by or first fortified by our Englishman, John Woodhouse, we have these areas on the eastern side, Noto and Syracuse, where maybe if you're there visiting these beach town areas, you could try to find just for your own fun and maybe have with like a gelato or like a light cookie or something, and could just be a fun thing to try and maybe remind you of their past. But one of the areas for this Moscato sweet wine production is from the island of Pantelleria, which this is the one that's closer to Tunisia, the northern parts of Africa. But again, look at these crazy slopes and these conditions in which they're growing the grapes. Absolutely amazing, right? And the producer that you want to check out is Marco de Bartoli. He's our Marsala producer that grew up in a winemaking family that was more focused on large scale production. And that was never his intent. So Marco de Bartoli went off to go become a professional race car driver before returning back to his family vineyards. And besides just Marsala production, he does these Muscat sweet wine examples from the island of Pantelleria. And supposedly it was these sweet pasito, means they're just drying out the grapes, essentially raisinating the fruits to create a sweet style of wine. They're not necessarily fortifying it. So it'll still drink a little bit lighter. One of his famous one is Virgin. Oh, it'll come to me in a second. It's actually an unfortified example, but me and that little tangent, Marco de Bartoli, quality Marsala, but also makes sweet wines from this island of Pantelleria. And it was supposed to be from the Cebibo, which is just Muscat. Muscat is Cebibo, very floral, very expressive, very tropical. And then the number of styles that you can produce from, you can make it with white grapes and an unoxidative and an oxidative style. This is where it turns brown and golden, like watching an apple turn brown as you bite into it, where it just might be a little bit nuttier, but fortified wines. Reductive, non-oxidative environment, oxidative environment, and then you can make it with red wines. And then you can also have different sweetness levels with it. And then there are also aged examples. You can kind of see that in color here. This is Marco de Bartoli. You can see some of his race cars in the background. And then this is his famous bottling. That's actually a Marsala wine from Grillo, but it's unfortified. And that's what kind of stands apart from some of the other ones, but it was how they were traditionally made before John Woodhouse came along, our Englishman in the 1700s. So that's what he's trying to embrace, and that's what he's trying to focus on. And the one difference here is that Virgin, if you ever happen to see that Virgine, That's where it's on, fortified after fermentation, where it'll be dry, similar to sherry. If that makes any sense. Me not trying to summarize the stuff rather quickly. To leave it at that, and you make it in a Solera style, similar to sherry as well. And this is Pantelleria, the island off the coast, and this is how they can dry it out on straw mats, the pasito style. If it's not Marco de Bartoli, you can also find Donna Fugata. You can try other wonderful wines from Donna Fugata as well. They're slightly larger producers, but make wonderful examples from all over. And then let's just visiting quickly the Aeolian Islands on the northern parts of Sicily. They call it Malvasia de Lipari, but this is just the most inhabited island. A lot of it actually comes from Salina. This Carvaglio, they make some cool wines, even dry whites that I've tried. But again, it's only like 1 or 2 producers. And then look at this. We'll finish some awesome pictures. So you guys, for those that have been patient and kind on our island travels, we get to take in some cool scenery. Like, look at this, you guys. This is Lipari. This is what it's like to grow grapes and harvest grapes there. And this is it's like almost like a boutique hotel winery. I got both of these from Forbes magazine, but what the hell, right? Like, if you try this wine from this producer Carvaglio, it's like, holy shit, this is like a $15-20 white, but look at it where the grapes are being grown and where it comes from. And then this is even too, we'll just look at some pictures. This is off the island Ischia, off the coast of Naples, where you'd be in Campania, where you could visit like Pompeii, and the wines of Taurasi are great Alianicos. But here they focus on white grapes, Falangina, this unique varietal Forastera. This one producer, Senatiempo, that we could try this unique Forastera grape, relatively bright and dry and crisp with maybe a light florality to it. But I think I feel like dry whites would be easily worth trying. And then the last where we finish off is on the island Elba, right off the coast of Tuscany, where your great Chianti Classicos come from, your Brunello de Montalcinos come from, your wonderful Super Tuscans. And they're really known for these sweet wine styles based off of the Aliatico grape, which is kind of like a red muscat. It's very floral and it's very expressive. But this one producer, Sicilia down here, we've had multiple different bottlings from, where you can try Inzolia or Ansanica, or you can try Vermentino, or you can try these sweet pasito styles from this almost like red muscat Aliatico grape, where they again just are drying out the grapes prior to fermentation, essentially making wine from raisins in a relatively light dessert styles. And then, well, I want to get there finally. Oh my gosh, you made me sit through an hour and a half almost, or hour and 15 minutes. It wasn't so bad. Do we ever get to go? Yeah, let's get there. Some of the foods here. I had this this pasta con le sarde, just from Sicily, where they're using these salty sardines and fennel and olive oil and this like traditional pasta dish. But you read about some of the awesome gelato that comes from these areas. Lipari and the northern island, this is where a lot of capers come from. I love the saltiness that capers lend in certain dishes. A lot of fresh seafood, if it's tuna. But this is right off of Siracusa, you know, that eastern part area where we have like Moscato de Nota. And look at this. This is crazy. So this is where you could probably try to see if you can find any bottles of these sweet fortified muscat wines that we learn about, that is only made in very small production. And some of these old Greek temples, it's pretty wild. And then this is our Feudo Montoni. So you had their Cadarato. This is their Nerello Mascalese Rosé blend that they have. But again, you see it goes all the way back to 1469. And then where they're located actually in the central parts of Sicily, they have a nursery with some own rooted vines. And I understand that as supplying source material for other producers that are looking to work with these indigenous varietals. And here we have this awesome lady winemaker, Elisabetta, from Sardinia, where I've tried her Vermentinos before in this Cannonau, but she even makes a Monica. If you want to try a lighter example, I haven't tasted that one myself, but her kind of taking over from her family's winery and starting her own label, kind of again that move from co-op production to self-estate bottling, what she's trying to accomplish. And maybe more working in more reserved natural examples. And then just a nice, pretty picture. Again, I don't know where my friend sourced this from, but it has to be Sardinia or Sicily somewhere. But it looks nice. Blue skies and blue waters, and time to go try Naragas or try Nanzolia now, while we're soaking in some rays and eating our, if it's not fresh seafood, roasted pigs and lambs. All right, guys. Cool. I understand why most people had to sign out. Again, the intention is never to go over, but we get carried away. So we'll send out them outline and everything. Do you have any questions or anything while we're hanging out? Did you like the wines? Yeah, not bad, right? Just fresh and easy and cool. Well, yeah, I think it's just a place where there's a lot of potential. I think we're going to see a lot. There's going to be a lot more introduced to us over the next, another 10, 20 years. So we only have things to look forward to with these areas where these younger producers are showing us all these unique things from these unique varietals. All right, well, we'll let you go on. I don't want to take any more of your time, but I'm here for questions. And thanks for bearing with me on this. And hopefully you had fun. And we'll let you enjoy the rest of the night. And then you'll have my email if there's any other questions outside of that. Cool.
Thanks, Ryan.
Much, everybody. Nice to see you as always, Venkat.
Yeah, definitely. These wines are great. I actually had a Monsant last week, which was 100% Grenache as well. So it's interesting comparing the two, the Cannonau and the Monsant.
Priorat,
just outside Priorat, yeah, the area, the border around Priorat. But this is a lot more sort of earthy and sort of deeper. The Monsant that I had was really like bright strawberry and bright red cherry.
Not to keep in, you guys, I wouldn't feel anything of it if you said, who are the producers for your Monsant and who is your producer for the Cannonau?
Oh, the Cannonau is the one that you sent, the Mora and Memo from Ledoux.
Yeah, and it's got a little structure to it. It's kind of like an easy drink in Sangiovese to me, that one almost. I thought it was a little higher. Anyway. And
the Monsant I had was, I can put it in the chat, Altero Starmos.
I don't know if I know them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that up in Priorat area, they're spending on the winemaking. You can see fresh and easy, and then you can see like dark and brooding. And I think they're getting away from these over oak styles that I think were popular in the late 90s, early 2000s. But yeah, Grenache, it can drink so differently, so many different places. I suppose that's a lot of different varietals, right? But okay.
Right. Yeah, I love your characterization of sun-kissed Pinot. That is sort of the best way that I found so far to remember Grenache across the board, even with its differences.
I repeat it all the time. I heard Laura. Yeah. But it's true. God, like Australian Grenache, it's just like it looks pretty and light, and then you taste it, you're like, holy cow, this is so rich. And it tastes like candy. You're like, this is not what I was expecting, like can drink like a Zinfandel, All right. Cool. Peace.
Right. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, man.